Hi everyone. So now we're going to do Judges. Okay, so Judges 1, we start again with after Joshua's death, the people now ask God who should go up against the Canaanites and take possession of their land. So God says that Judah must go and he must take Simeon with him. And then they slay the Canaanites, the Perizzites, and the Jebusites. And then they drive them out of their territories. And then Judah also conquers Negev, Hebron, Sheshia, Ahiman, Talmai, Debir, Zephah, Gaza, Askelon, and Ekron. So again, Judah now basically, the tribe of Judah basically just continues this legacy of Joshua taking possession of the places that they should. And then it gives a whole list of what tribes of Israel did not drive out some of the tribes that were in the land. So this is mainly where a lot of Israel's problems started, because they did not do as God said in driving out these nations. They just left them, and or what they did was they put them to forced labor, but they should have driven them out. So now, further as we see in Judges, these nations continue to influence Israel in their worship and in what they do, and Israel stops following the commands of God because they start following these gods of these other nations. So them not driving out these nations as God said caused them quite a lot of problems later. So I'm not going to go through all of them again. Like, as you hear, reading all these names is quite complicated. So I'll include this table for you all in that document. Then you can just go and see which nations were left. So then in Joshua, see, I'm still in Joshua. Now in Judges, Judges 2, it's basically like a summary of, also as we saw in the video, like that cycle that Israel follows. So they do evil in the sight of the Lord. They do not follow His commandments. They worship the gods of the other nations. And then God lets another nation conquer them, and they serve this nation or this king of that nation. And then for many years, and then they repent and they cry out to God for His help, and then He does send a judge, or another word for judge is like defender or deliverer, and they deliver Israel from that nation, and then they have peace again for quite some time while the judge is ruling over them, and they listen to the judge. But as soon as the judge dies, Israel goes back and does their evil ways and serves other gods, and then the cycle repeats. So Judges 2 just gives us like that cycle and how many times it repeats. And it's important, there it says that the Israelites harloted after the gods of the other nations. So we continuously, like in Deuteronomy and Joshua and everywhere, we see this like golden thread of God being like a husband to Israel. And then every time they serve these other gods, God explains it like they harlot after these other nations, as if they forsake their husband and go after this other woman. So, and this is again also like an image for us now of Jesus being the husband and the church being the bride of Christ. So that like little golden thread just goes throughout the whole Bible. And it's important in Judges 2 where it says that the new generation did not know and recognize and understand the Lord, and did not know these laws, and they did evil. But I ask myself, like, why do they not know these things? And it just comes down to the fact that their parents did not teach them these things. And they also had a choice, even if their parents did teach them, whether they wanted to listen to it or not. So it's again just that thing of the responsibility that parents have to teach their children the ways of God, and the responsibility that the children have to then actually follow in the ways of God. So that's Judges 2, and all the points that I had there. Okay, then Judges 3 to 8, I made up this whole table of which kings then conquer Israel, how long they serve that king, and then what that king or that nation has done to Israel when conquering them, then which judge delivers them, how long they have peace, as that judge then rules over them and they do right in the sight of God. And then also in which chapter of Judges you can go and read the full story. So Judges 3 to 8, there's like three. Judges 3 to 5. There's three main judges, and you can just go and read their stories, because I'm not going to go through all of that, but so I'll include this table so then you can go and look at that and read the full stories. So I'm just going to run through a few points, but if you want the whole story of all these battles and things, which are quite exciting, again, action-packed, and there were some very, gruesome, funny, exciting, stories. So you can go and read it. It's interesting. So the first king that conquers them is the king of Mesopotamia, and they serve him for 8 years. And then Othniel, Caleb's younger brother, saves or delivers them as their judge, and then they have peace for 40 years, and this is in Judges 3. So then the next king that conquers Israel after, again, they've now done evil in the sight of the Lord, is Eglon, king of Moab, and then they serve him for 18 years. And Eglon takes possession of Jericho again. So it's almost as if now Israel is going backwards, because God has now just given them Jericho and given them victory over Jericho. And now, because they are disobedient, this king of Moab takes what God has given them away from them again. So it's like they're just going back to... They're not making any progress. They're just going back. So... And then Ehud is the judge that delivers them, and they have peace for 80 years. And you can go and read the battle between Ehud and Eglon in Judges 3. And then the next king that conquers them is Jabin, king of Canaan, and they serve him for 20 years. And he severely oppressed the Israelites. So the judge who then delivers them is Deborah, the first prophetess in the Bible. And you can also then go and read the battle that Deborah has with the king Jabin in Judges 4 and 5. So, I'm not going to go into all of that detail. I'll rather focus on the next three main judges, because, their stories are a bit more important, I guess. So, then Judges 6, again, the Israelites do evil in the sight of God, and Midian, this nation conquers them, and they serve Midian for 7 years. And what Midian then did to Israel is they destroyed their crops, and they left no ox or sheep or donkey in Israel. And so Israel was greatly impoverished in that time that they served Midian. And then the judge who was going to deliver them was Gideon. Okay, so God then appears to Gideon, and he says to him that he must go and fight against the Midian people and then deliver Israel. And Gideon then responds to that, and he says, "But Lord, my clan is the poorest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house." So I think what is significant here is like he disqualifies himself for the work of God, because he says, "I'm poor and I'm the least." And I think that sometimes we also do that. We look at ourselves and we're like, "No, God, I can't do what you've called me to do." But actually, God is saying, "No, I've still chosen you." And God qualified Gideon. So God will also qualify us and empower us to do what he has called us to. Even though we think we can't do it, he will empower us to do it. So then God also tells Gideon to then go and take a bull from his father's herd, and then go and pull down the altar of Baal, and also the image that they have of the goddess of Asherah that they have put up like in the temple or so. You should pull that down, and then the wood that was used to make this image of the goddess of Asherah, he must chop that up and build the altar for God, and then sacrifice the bull on that altar. So then he goes to do that, and the next morning, obviously the people wake up and they see that Baal and the image of Asherah is pulled down, which was the things that they were worshipping. So obviously they are furious, and they go to Gideon's father's house, and they say no, they want to kill Gideon. And then his father says, well, why do you want to kill Gideon? If Baal is then a true God, like, let him take vengeance himself. Let him contend for himself. So, basically then his father renames Gideon as Jerubbaal, and it means let Baal contend against him. So it's also very clever of his father of saying, well, let's put Baal to the test. If he is a real God, he will do something, and obviously he doesn't, because he's just a piece of silver or gold. So then it says that God then comes to Gideon and tells him again, like, that he will have victory over the Midianites. But Gideon asks God for confirmation, and he asks for confirmation twice. So the first time he says to God, okay, he will put fleece, it's like a piece of lamb's wool, outside, and then if there is dew on it, but the ground around it is dry, then he knows God will be with them and give them victory. So that happens, and then Gideon is still not convinced, so he asks God for a second sign, and this time he says if the fleece is dry but the ground is wet, then he will know God will be with them, and then that happens. So now Gideon is convinced. So then in Judges 7, he calls together the armies, and he's like, okay, let's go and fight the Midianites. And so then they camp just south of the Midianite camp. But God then tells him that his army is too big, he has too many people, because he says that if they win with this amount of people, then the Israelites will take the credit for themselves and say, oh, we got this victory, and they would not glorify God for giving them the victory. So he says, no, your army is too big, send the people home who are afraid. So 20,000 go home, and only 10,000 remain. And still God says, no, your army is still too big. Take the men down to a little stream and let them drink water. And then the men who bring the water up from the river within their hands to drink, then they will go to battle. But the men who bend down and drink the water like a dog from the river, they will have to go home. So only 300 men scoop the water with their hands, bring it to their mouths and drink. So they are the ones who can then go to battle, and the rest is sent home. And then again, God gives Gideon this battle plan. So he says, give each man a horn or a trumpet and a torch and a clay pot. And he says, then they should surround the Midianite camp, and then when Gideon blows his horn, then all of the 300 men should also blow their horns and smash their clay pots. So they do that, and then obviously the Midianites are just startled and shocked and afraid, and in the dark they just scramble and they start killing each other within the camp, because now they don't know who's enemy and who's friend, and so basically they kill themselves. So God is just giving them this victory without them really having to fight for it. And then they just chase all of the remaining people from the Midianites across the Jordan. Alright, so then in Judges 8, Gideon then also goes and destroys many of the towers and cities of the Midianites, and then he gets all this gold from this one city, and then he makes an ephod, which is like a sacred garment that the high priest used to wear when they then prophesied. So now the people started to worship this ephod. Okay, so basically they started to worship the thing that represented the prophetic, and also many times we do that as well. We maybe look at a church and we start worshiping the church, or we start worshiping, let's say, if you because the ephod was like a symbol and of the prophetic, so they started worshiping the symbol. So maybe if you like have a cross or something in your house or around your neck or anything, maybe some of us like started worshiping that symbol of God instead of worshiping God. Okay, and you think, okay, I can only pray in a church, or I'm only a Christian at church, or we give like value to a place or a symbol more than to God. So we shouldn't do that. So the Israelites, they started worshipping this ephod, and they started worshipping prophecy rather than worshipping God, who gives the prophecy, who is greater than the prophecy. So that whole dynamic. So we also shouldn't do that. We should remember to keep God at the top, like only worship Him, and not these symbols or images or things that do represent Him but are not. We shouldn't worship them. We should worship God alone. Okay, and then Gideon takes for himself many wives, and he has 70 sons, which is crazy, a lot of sons. And he dies at an old age, and he's buried. And then after he dies again, Israel turned to Baal, and they start worshipping him. Okay, and then his son Abimelech makes a deal with his mother's family, and he asks them for money to slay his other 69 brothers, and they give him silver, and he hires men to kill his 69 brothers. And then one of them escape. His name is Jotham, and he goes and hides in the mountain. And then they crown Abimelech like a king of Israel. And when Jotham hears about this, he goes and stands on the mountain and he shouts over Israel that they have not dealt with Gideon right, because he has put his life on the line in fighting for them, and they have not repaid him for it. And now, with Abimelech being king, if what he has done by killing his brothers and crowning himself king is right, then Jotham is like, okay, that's fine, I will even serve you as my king. But if you have not dealt correctly by killing your his brothers and crowning himself king, then Jotham says that fire should come from heaven and burn Abimelech. So and then he goes and hides again. So it's that whole thing of the brothers against the brothers, and yeah, just that need for power, if I can say it like that, that is just coming through. So then Abimelech is the king over Israel for 3 years, and then he has many battles that he goes to fight, and he approaches this one tower, and he goes to the door of the tower to set the tower on fire, and there's a woman on top of the tower, and she drops a big millstone on his head, and his skull cracks and he's just lying there, and then he asks his armor bearer to slay him. So, and there it says that God repaid the wickedness of Abimelech on himself for slaying his brothers. Okay, so then after him, there is the judge Tola for 23 years and Jair for 22 years. And then again, Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. And this time, the Philistines and the Ammonites conquered them, and they served them for 18 years. And the Philistines and the Ammonites oppressed and crushed and broke the Israelites. That's literally what it says. That's quite hectic. And this time, Jephthah was going to be the judge to deliver them. And then after he does, they have peace for 31 years, and we can read that in Judges 10 to 12. Just going to run through that very quickly. So, as a teenager, Jephthah is then driven away from his house, and but when the Israelites are now conquered by the Philistines and the Ammonites, they come to Jephthah and they say, will you please lead our army in battle, because he was a great warrior. And then he says, okay, I will do that, but then you must allow me to come back and live with the Israelites. So they said, okay, that's fine. And then he goes and he takes the tribe or the nation of Gilead with him from Israel, and then they go and fight the Ammonites, and they have a victory. And then when they return to Israel, the Ephraimites come and say, but why haven't you invited us to go to battle with you? Which is just ridiculous. Just thank him for the victory kind of thing. But so then they are upset, and Jephthah then calls the Gilead army again, and then they go and fight the Ephraimites, and they slay 42,000 of them. So now he's just killing his own people, which is not good. And then he judged over them for 6 years, and then he died and was buried. So after him, there was the judge Ibzah for 7 years, Eglon for 10 years, and Abdon for 8 years. Then in Judges 13, again, the Israelites did evil in the sight of the Lord, and this time they were conquered by the Philistines, and they served the Philistines for 40 years. And the judge who was going to deliver them was Samson, and after he delivered them, they had peace for 20 years, and we can read that in Judges 13 to 16. So just quickly going to run through that. So an angel of the Lord then appeared to Manoah's wife and told her that she will bear a son, and that no razor should come on his head, because the child will be a Nazirite to the Lord. And basically what that Nazirite means is just he is consecrated for the service of God. Alright? So then she goes and tells her husband, and her husband doesn't believe her, so he asks God to send the angel again, and the angel comes again and tells them both again, that they will have a son, and that he will be a Nazirite to God. And then, when their son is born, they call him Samson. And then Samson sees a Philistine woman, and he wants her to be his wife. So he tells his parents about it, and he then goes to speak to her about becoming his wife. But on his way, a lion comes on his way, and then he just tore the lion to pieces. Just showing like his immense strength that he had. So, but he doesn't tell his parents about it. Then he goes to speak to the woman, and then when he returns home, he sees that in the carcass of the lion, a swarm of bees have made their nest, and they are making honey, and he ate some of it, and he took some of it home for his parents, but he does not tell them where he got it. So then him and his father goes to the woman's house for like a feast, or I guess it's similar to like a wedding banquet. And then the Philistines hear that Samson is there, so they gather 13 companions and they go and see him. And he gives them this riddle that they need to solve in 7 days. And he promised them 30 linen undergarments and 30 change of garments. And obviously they can't solve it, so on the 7th day, they go to his wife and they say, entice your husband to declare to you the answer of the riddle, and then you come and tell us, and then we will tell him, and then we get all of the things that he's promised. So then it says that she wept before him, and then she tells him that if he does not tell her the answer to the riddle, it means that he does not love her. Okay? So then he tells her, and she tells those people, and those people tell Samson the answer, and then he knew that his wife told him, because he knew that without her help they would not have been able to solve the riddle. And then he goes and slays 30 men and takes their undergarments and change of garments, and then gives it to the people who explained to him the riddle. And then he goes home, and his wife is then given to his best friend. Okay. A very important point I want to make here of when she tells him that if you don't tell me the answer to the riddle, you don't love me. I think many times we are confronted with that, where people tell us or manipulate us and say that you need to do this for me to prove your love to me. Or if you don't do this, it means that you don't love me. And we just need to be very aware of that and to not give in to that, because it's just manipulation. And you don't have to do something to prove your love to someone, especially if it's something wrong. I think many people are confronted with this in relationships where they want to convince each other to sleep together to prove their love to one another. And of just saying, in me not engaging with you in this is actually proving my love more, because I actually want to keep me and you pure until our marriage, if that makes sense. We shouldn't just give in to this manipulation. Rather, just do what is right and what God wants from us, and rather listen to what God wants us to do, even though that person then feels unloved. If they wanted you to do something wrong to prove your love for them, it's not a good relationship, and I wouldn't suggest that you stay in that relationship. So then rather leave the relationship and obey what God is saying, and not give in to that manipulation. Okay, so then in Judges 15, Samson then goes back, and now he wants his wife back. And her father then doesn't want to give her to him. So then he catches 300 jackals and he ties their tails together, and he ties a torch to their tails, and then he sends them into the fields of the Philistines, and he basically burns down their whole harvest. So obviously the Philistines are furious, so they go kill his wife and her father, because her father didn't just give her to him and then it would have been over. But now that caused that Samson burned down their whole harvest. So then, so then Samson goes and hides in a cleft in the mountains, and 3,000 men of Judah then come and to capture him, to give him to the Philistines, because they want him. And then, so they tie him up and they give him to the Philistine, and it says, the Spirit of the Lord came upon Samson, and the ropes on his arms became as flax and caught fire, and his bonds melted from his hands. And he found a jawbone of a donkey, and he took that and slew 1,000 of the Philistine men who were taking him into captivity. So just again, his immense strength when the Holy Spirit comes upon him, that literally the ropes around his arms caught fire. Just imagine that. It's just so crazy. So yeah, I just love that picture of God's power and His Holy Spirit. Okay, so then Samson judges or defends Israel for 20 years. And then in Judges 16, now Samson gets a new wife. So his new wife is Delilah, and she's a Philistine. And then the Philistines pay her 1,100 pieces of silver to get her, or to entice Samson and to get him to tell her in what his strength lies. So firstly, he tricks her 3 times by giving her false information about where his strength lies in. So firstly he says if they use fresh and strong strings that are still moist, and they tie him with that, then he will not be able to break free from it, and he will be weak. Then the second time he says, okay, use new ropes that have never been used before, and if they tie him with that, you will not be able to break free and he will be weak. And then the third time he tells her that if she braids his hair in 7 braids that it looks like a web, then he will lose his strength and become weak. But all 3 times that's untrue, and he still keeps his strength. And then it says that she pressed him day after day with her words and urged him, and he was vexed to death. So then he just tells her everything. And so he then tells her that his strength is in the fact that his hair has never been cut. Alright? So then, and it's interesting if you look at the 3 times that he tricks her. First time it's just these strings, and the next time it's ropes, and then it's braids in his hair. So each time he's getting closer to the truth, and until she continuously pressurizes him for the answer, again manipulation and peer pressure and all of that, he just gives in and gives her the whole story. So then she lets him sleep on her knees, and then she calls a man in to shave off his 7 braids, and then obviously he loses his strength and he becomes torment. And that's actually what his name means. Samson means torment. And so then his strength leaves him and he's weak. So the Philistines then catch him and they bored out his eyes. And then they took him to Gaza. So then the Philistines, the lords of the Philistines, they gathered to have a big sacrifice day to their lord of Dagon. And they said that this Lord Dagon, or this God of Dagon, has given them Samson into their hands. So they are making all these sacrifices and celebration to their idol Dagon. And then this boy leads Samson into the house, and he says to the boy, okay, put me between the pillars that carry the house, and so I can rest against them. So the boy doesn't really think anything of it, so he then ties Samson between the 2 main pillars of the house. And then in verse 28 and 29, Samson calls to the Lord and he says, "O Lord, earnestly remember me, I pray you, and strengthen me, I pray you. Only this once, O God. Let me have one vengeance upon the Philistines for both my eyes." So God then grants him this request, and he gives him back his strength. And then Samson pushes over these two pillars that are carrying the house, and the house collapses on these people, that all the Philistines that were in the house, and basically Samson dies with them as well when the house collapsed. So in his death, he actually kills more people than in his entire life. Okay, so just as like an overview of his life, when slaying the lion, we see that he actually has this immense strength. So he actually had the power to deliver Israel. Okay, but he got distracted with these women in his life. And sometimes also, like, God gives us a calling, or he gives us gifts and power, and we are able to do what he has called us to do, but we get sidetracked from that by things that are in our lives that maybe shouldn't be there. But also in Samson's story, God's redemption power, he still gives Samson his strength at the end to deliver Israel. So even though sometimes we have gotten distracted, or we have made mistakes, and we've not done what God has called us to do, he can still redeem our mistakes and help us to complete what he has called us to do. Okay, and then in Judges 17, Micah from the tribe of Ephraim, he makes for himself like silver images, and he has a whole house full of gods, of these graven images. Alright, and there was a young man from the tribe of Levi who then came to Micah, and Micah offered him a job, and he basically said, "I'll pay you 10 pieces of silver, and give you clothes and provision for your living if you come and be my priest." So the young man agrees, and now Micah says, "Okay, now the Lord will favor me, because now I have a Levite as my priest." And it's actually exactly the opposite. Now he's using God's anointed priest to help him serve false gods. Like, it's just crazy. And so yeah, basically also this Levite leaves his calling to be a priest for God for the money that he's getting from Micah. And sometimes in our lives as well, like, you see people who leave what God has called them to do because in another job they feel that they can make more money. So they don't do what God has called them to because they want money more. Okay, and then in Judges 18, the tribe of Dan conquers the city that Micah lives in, and they take all Micah's things, and then they make even more of these images and set them up with all of Micah's images, and they worship all of these things, which is, very bad. And then in Judges 19, it's a very gruesome story that you can go and read, but I'm just going to pass over it. But you can go and read it if you want. But then in Judges 20 to 21, we see Israel's first civil war. And then that phrase that also the video was talking about the whole time of, in those days, there was no king in Israel, and every man did what was right in his own eyes. And this is basically setting the stage for the next part of the Bible, where the kings then rule over Israel. So just as we look over Judges, this book is a very messy book. And even the world that we're living in today is a very messy world. So it almost represents the messiness of our world today. And some of our lives are just messy. But the theme of this book is just God's faithfulness to every time his people find themselves in this messy situation, he sends someone to deliver them and save them and help them through this situation. So for us as well, whenever we have like a time in our lives that's just messy and just, we're just going through a horrible time, God then sends someone to also help us through that. And also just how he sent Jesus to ultimately give us salvation and deliverance and redemption. And just set us free from our sin. So it's just like God continuously being faithful to his people. And even though they turn away from him every time, he is still faithful. And it just shows like his relentless effort of trying to have a relationship with the Israelites and how they just are not interested. God will always faithfully pursue a relationship with you, but we also need to respond. and return that relationship to him as well. Okay, and then we get to Ruth. Ruth is very short. It's just 4 chapters, so we will go through it quickly. And it's such an amazing love story. I actually love Ruth. It's a very nice book. So yeah, just after this whole gruesome battle books, we get to this nice book of redemption, and again setting the stage for a king to come rule over Israel. So then in Ruth 1 it says that in the days that the judges ruled over Israel, there was a famine in the land, and there was a man named Elimelech and his wife's name was Naomi. And then so they moved from Judah to Moab, and then Elimelech dies, and his wife Naomi is left with her 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. And then both of them get married, but later both of them also die. So Naomi is then left with her 2 daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth. And then, and they are both also from Moab. And then she hears that God has given the people of Judah food in this famine. So she knows that she should move back to Judah if she wants to survive, because she and her 2 daughters-in-law cannot work the land and bring in a harvest, because that's why they needed men and sons in that time, is to basically work the fields, get a harvest, and provide food for them to live. So now that there's famine and they can't work the land, she has to go back to Judah because she doesn't have a choice. So then she tells Orpah and Ruth to go back to their mother's and father's houses, and Orpah then goes, but Ruth says to Naomi that she wants to stay with her, and so Ruth says to Naomi, where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge, and your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. And this is also very important, because after reading Joshua and Judges, you feel like, sure, God doesn't even have mercy on these people. He just lets Israel destroy them all, and it's very gruesome, and like, how can God even do that? How can a loving God just destroy all these people? And here we actually see that Ruth, who is a Moabite, can also serve God and like become an Israelite. So throughout the entire, and now if we go back, throughout the entire books of Joshua and Judges, and even before that, Deuteronomy, Numbers, all of these books, these other nations had the opportunity to also serve God and to almost become Israelites. So if all of them repented and turned from their very, very evil ways and also served the God of Israel, none of them would have had to be killed, and they all could have lived together in the promised land. But because they did not turn to God and kept living in their very, very evil ways, those nations did very evil stuff. So then God said, okay, for his nation, Israel, to not be influenced by all of these other nations' practices and beliefs, they have to be killed. Okay, so here we see that they all actually had the opportunity to also believe in God, in the God of Israel. So that promise that God actually gave to Abraham, it was actually inclusive. Anyone could become part of Israel. It's not just exclusive to Israel alone. So here we see that. So if all of the people from Judges and Joshua and everything turned to God, they would have been saved. Okay, so then Naomi and Ruth returned to Judah. Okay, so then in Judah, Naomi had a kinsman, and he was quite a wealthy man from her husband's family, and his name was Boaz. So Ruth then, because they did not have like land, or they couldn't work the land, she gleaned in the fields after the reapers. So the reapers came to reap the grain, and then the little pieces that they dropped, she walked after them and picked them up. And that's how she gathered food for her and Naomi. So then Boaz sees her, and he asks his servants, like, who is she? And so the servants then say that she's Naomi's daughter-in-law. And then Boaz says to them, okay, drop some of the grain on purpose so that she can pick it up and have enough food for her and Naomi. And because Boaz says that he knows how much she has done for Naomi. And then Okay, so then when Boaz then says to her that it's fine, she can glean after his reapers, she says, she thanks him for it, and then Boaz says to her, because she has looked after her mother-in-law for so long, that God should bless her for that. And then so she every day from morning to evening she gleaned after his servants or his reapers, and gathers enough food for her Naomi. So then in Ruth 3, Naomi tells Ruth to wash and anoint herself and put on her best clothes, and then wait until Boaz has finished eating and drinking. And when he goes to bed, she must go into his room and then uncover his feet and lie down at his feet. Okay? And then when he wakes up and he sees her, he will tell her what to do. Alright? So she does that. And when he wakes up at night and sees her, he asks her, like, who are you? And then she says, no, I'm Ruth. It's fine, don't worry. And she basically asks him to marry her or to redeem her, because he is her next of kin. And just explaining that in their culture, if, let's say, a man and a wife gets married and the man dies, then usually his brother has to take his wife as his wife. Okay? And they refer to that as the woman is then redeemed. Okay? Because, as I was saying previously, they needed the men to work the land and have food and provision and shelter and all of that. So if she's not redeemed, she basically doesn't have anything anymore. So she doesn't have food or a house or anything. So she then basically goes to Boaz and asks him to redeem her. Right? And then he tells her, okay, there is another next of kin that's actually closer to her. So if he doesn't want to redeem her, then he will redeem her. And then he gives her some more food to take home. And then the next morning, so this is in Ruth 4, the next morning then Boaz goes to that next of kin that is the closest to her, and he asks he asks him to redeem the land of Naomi. And he says, yes, okay, it's fine, I'll take the land. And then Boaz says, but you need to take Ruth as well. And then he says, no, I can't do that. So then Boaz says, okay, he will do it. So Boaz takes Ruth and she becomes his wife, and she bears him a son. And alright, and then the woman who was like the midwife for Ruth says to Naomi, may Boaz be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher and a supporter in your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is better to you than 7 sons, who has borne him a son. And then also her neighbors then also say to Naomi, the neighbors called the son of Ruth Obed. So just again looking at this of like who Boaz then basically was to Ruth, was like this nourisher, supporter, redeemer, restorer of life, protector, provider, all of these things. And basically this picture for us is how Jesus redeems us, and he becomes like our, again that thing of the bride, the church being the bride of Christ, Jesus redeeming us and being our protector, our provider, our restorer, our nourisher and supporter and all of that. So it's actually just this amazing like love story and redemption story, like just after this really gruesome part of the Israelites really just falling into this evilness, then it's almost like this redemption that comes right after that. So it's also like when we were at our worst in life and we were just doing things that we shouldn't be doing, Jesus comes with this redemption story and redeems us. Okay, and then we see that Obed is then the father of Jesse, and Jesse is the father of David, and then he's the ancestor of Jesus. So through Ruth and Boaz, they are basically the great-great-grandparents of the King David, and they also form part of the lineage of Jesus. So, yeah, I think this really sets the stage for the King of David and all of them to come, which we will see next week. But, just showing that how if Israel do not obey God's laws, all of this evil just comes, but God still redeems them and gives them this salvation, just as God is giving us salvation. And again, just that promise of a king to come. And for us, as we also describe Jesus as the King of Kings. So he, as the King, then comes to also redeem us. So yeah, just how everything fits together is just so amazing. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed Joshua, Judges, and Ruth. And yes, again, an hour-and-a-half message. I really tried, but it was a lot. So, but yeah, so I hope you all can join the Zoom meeting tomorrow, and that we can discuss a bit more and answer any questions or things that you guys might have. Also, you can feel free to put your questions on the group if you can't make it to the Zoom session, and then, or you can just message me or Christy privately, and we can also answer your questions, whichever works for you. If you don't want to ask in the group or in the Zoom session, that's fine. You can also ask us privately or even call us. We are available to answer your questions, and yeah. So yeah, I hope you guys have a good day today, and then yeah, see you all tomorrow.